Thomas Edward, who went to the Asante kingdom and saw for himself, and of course, he's the guy who compared the Asante kingdom to Egypt and the Abyssinians, saying that they originate from some common source. This is way before me, obviously, because this is the early 1700s. The construction of the ornamental architecture of Kumasi reminded me forcibly of the ingenious essay of Sir James Hall, tracing the Gothic order to an architectural imitation of the wickerwork. The drawings will serve to shew the various and uncommon character of their architectural ornaments, adopted from those of interior countries, and confessedly in no degree originating with themselves. In building a house, a mold was made for receiving the swish or clay by rows of stakes and wattlework, placed at a distance equal to the intended thickness of the wall. As too, mud walls were raised at convenient distances to receive the plum pudding stone, which formed the walls of the fortified fortresses in Scotland. The intervals was then filled up with gravelly clay mixed with water, with which the outward surface of the frame or stake work was also thickly plastered, so as to impose the appearance of an entire thick mud wall. The houses had all gable ends, and three thick poles were joined to each, one from the highest point forming the ridge of the roof, and one on each side from the base of the triangular part of the gable. These supported a framework of bamboo, over which an interwoven thatch of palm leaves was laid and tied with the runners of trees, first to the large poles running from the gable to the gable, and afterwards to the interlacing of the bamboo framework, which was painted black and polished so as to look much better than any rude ceiling would, of which they have no idea. A small part appears in the houses in the drawing of Adam Street. The pillars which assist to support the roof and form the proscenium or open front, which none but the captains are allowed to have to their houses, were thick poles, afterwards squared with a plastering of swish. The steps and raised floor of these rooms were clay and stone, with a thick layer of red earth, which abounds in the neighborhood, and these were washed and painted daily, with an infusion of the same earth in water. It has all the appearance of red ochre, and from the abundance of iron ore in the neighborhood, I do not doubt it is. The walls still soft, they formed molds or frameworks of the patterns in delicate slips of cane, connected by grass. The two first slips projected the relief commonly mezzo. The interstices were then filled up with plaster and assumed the appearance depicted. The poles or pillars were sometimes encircled by twists of cane intersecting each other, which being filled up with the plaster resembled the lozenge and cable ornament of the Anglo-Norman order. The quarterfoil was very common and by no means rude. From the symmetrical bend of the cane which formed it, I saw a few pillars, with numerous slips of cane pressed perpendicularly onto the wet surface, which being covered again with a very thin coat of plaster, closely resembled fluting. When they formed a large arc, they inserted one end of the thick piece of the cane in the wet clay of the floor or base, and bending the other over, inserted it in the same manner. The entablature was filled up with wattle work plastered over. Arcades and piazzas were common. A whitewash, very frequently renewed, was made from a clay in the neighborhood. Of course, the plastering is very frail, and in the relief frequently discloses the edges of the cane, giving, however, a piquant effect auxiliary to the ornament. The doors were an entire piece of cottonwood, cut with great labor out of the stems of buttresses of that tree. Battens, variously cut and painted, were afterwards nailed across. So disproportionate was the price of labor to that of the provision that I gave but 2 takus for a slab of cottonwood 5 feet by 3. The locks they use are from Hosa and quite original. One will be sent to the British Museum, where they raised at a first floor. The under room was divided into two by an intersecting wall to support the rafters for the upper room, which were generally covered with a framework thickly plastered over the red ochre. I saw but one attempt at flooring with plank. It was cottonwood, shaped entirely with the adze, and looked like a ship's deck. The windows were open woodwork, carved in the fanciful figures and intricate patterns, and painted red. The frames were frequently cased in gold, about as thick as cartridge paper. What surprised me most, in and is not the least of the many circumstances deciding their great superiority over the generality of Negroes, was the discovery that every house had its cloaca besides the common ones for the lower orders without the town. They were generally situated under a small archway in the most retired angle of the building, but not unfrequently upstairs, within a separate room like a small closet, where the large hollow pillar also assists to support the upper story. The holes are of a small circumference, but dug to a surprising depth, and boiling water is daily poured down, which effectively prevents the least offense. The rubbish and offal of each house was burnt every morning at the back of the street, and they were as nice and cleanly in their dwellings as in their persons. This is the floor plan, or the bird's eye view, of the streets of Kumasi as reported by Thomas Edward. He also states several things about what he saw on the street, including, people who had died and stuff like that. But the population that was reported was about 100,000 by the Asante themselves. The Europeans said that it was no more than about 30,000 or 15,000. This is disputed, but it's not that important given the fact that it was an impressive town nonetheless. Now remember, this is only one location of a confederacy, the Asante Confederacy, and the way the laws worked and everything is just completely different. This again should change your entire view about what's going on in Africa at the time. And remember, there's still their trade partner in the Kingdom of Congo, and also their other trade partners in Chad and Nigeria. So this civilization is nothing short of impressive, surrounded by other impressive civilizations which they had access to. But this is what they said about their market of Kumasi. The markets were held daily from the 8 o'clock in the morning until sunset. The lodge the lodger contains about 60 stalls or sheds, besides throngs of inferior vendors seated in all directions. Amongst the articles for sale were beef and mutton cut in small pieces for soup, wild hog, deer and monkeys, flesh, fowls, pelts and skins, yams, plantains, corn, sugarcane, rice, increma, peppers, vegetable, butter, oranges, pawpaws, pineapple, bananas, salt and dried fish from the coast, large snails, smoke, dried, and stuck in rows on small sticks in the form of herringbone, eggs for fetish, peto palm wine, rum, pipes, beads, looking glasses, sandals, silk, cotton cloth, powder, small pillows, white and blue cotton threads, calabashes, and much more.